I'd vote for Hitler before I'd vote for Biden. Hitler's more honest. That's how it is. When the rich pay all the taxes, the government will be small. Period. There is no example in human history where the rich paid all the taxes and the government was big. There are numerous examples in history of the opposite, of big governments taxing mostly poor and middle income people and the aristocrats.
With the Libertarian Party, they're, abolish all taxes, And so our idea is, well, which tax? Start with one tax. Tell me one tax you want to start with.
When Mitch McConnell sits down in a room with Biden and Schumer, you ain't getting smaller government, people. And you are not getting the wealth inequality fixed either. You are getting betrayed is what you're getting. And they come together and they get what they want.
These two third parties that have been around for so long, and why haven't they been successful?
The political compass, to me, is just infuriating because it's so stupid. You're going to answer 60 questions. You think that's really accurate, right? That's accurate. 60 questions. They got to get me right. Do you realize on their map, you can answer 60 questions exactly opposite someone else? Exactly opposite. And they will put you both together on their map.
Lloyd Sloan and Andrew Cottingham joined the podcast to pitch a new political map, one that's based on just two questions. Is wealth too unequal, and is the government too big? Take the test and find out which of the four quadrants you rank. Andrew and Lloyd advocate for solutions that fit into the upper left quadrant, believing the government is both too big and that wealth is too unequal. Recently, they took their test to the Libertarian National Convention and polled the attendees. Stay tuned for the results, as well as a lively discussion about why previous political models failed and why the United States needs a negative income tax. In your article, you talk about the politically homeless. I was just hoping you could expand on that a little bit and how that inspired you to create this new political map.
So I've been hearing a lot of talk online about there being a politically homeless class in America that wants neither political party. They don't want the Democrats, they don't want the Republicans, and they just feel stuck in this two-party system. And of course you have the third parties and you have independents, but they just feel lost, and they feel without a home. They feel without a party or a group, without an identity, essentially. So I've just been hearing talk about that online. Joe Rogan's talked about it. I've heard other people as well. The term's been around for quite a long time, but it's just now becoming more and more relevant as people get more and more disenfranchised with the two-party system.
I would say there's a Gallup poll out there, which Andrew just told me about, came out yesterday. First time ever, 51% of Americans say they're independents. So they are a larger group than Republicans and Democrats added together. That's significant. 70% in Gallup polls, even before we even went into the primary, said they did not want another election between Biden and Trump. So they probably wanted even less today than they did then. It begs, go ahead, it begs a lot of other questions because, it's not rocket science to know the natives are restless. The natives are restless, which is from the old Tarzan movies.
Absolutely. And I believe Andrew said you started working on this model like in 2013, was it, or 2011?
That's me.
You were working on it for that long. So, what was it that made you a decade ago?
I quit
do this, or did you see this coming?
I'll keep the long story short, but I was starting to work on a book in 2010 on the Constitution and how to fix some of the problems there. Started to realize that, you're not going to fix constitutional problems till you fix political problems. And, the statistic, incidentally, that really captured my attention, the federal government of the United States sends out 80 million checks a month. 80 million people in the United States expect a check from the federal government every month. You ain't going to fix the Constitution. You got another problem to solve first, period. And, nobody really likes the left-right political spectrum. Everybody knows it's broken, except the political science teachers, apparently, because they keep teaching it. They don't have an alternative to it. But, I can't say how the idea finally came, but I think there's a lot of two-dimensional maps out there. You're probably familiar with some. The libertarians have one that they say is two-dimensional. There's a horseshoe model that's been out there since the 1950s. People struggling with this left-right. I finally decided, how do you actually define left-right? I think it's based on the French Revolution. I went back to the original definitions. It's a class-based definition. The left is for the poor, the right is for the rich. It's basically a wealth inequality question. You know this because Bernie Sanders mentions wealth inequality every other sentence he speaks. So we know that's really important to the left. I knew there needed to be another dimension, and even Ronald Reagan knew that going way back. You can find Goldwater speeches that he's giving, and he's saying, it's not just left, right, it's up, down. And the up, down dimension is what I came to call the freedom dimension. So there's kind of an equality left-right dimension, and there's a freedom dimension of up, down, and that's based on size of government. It's very much the traditional, I say Republican ideas on this, particularly the good Republicans that see government size as an issue. But it goes back to Jefferson and Paine. They knew it was an issue. And so there's the basis of the what we call equality, freedom, up, down, left, right model. It's right behind Andrew. You can see it in, it's out. We have it. We've done polling on this, and that's your basic key insight is this. In fact, I got it on a T-shirt right here too. So, but you'd be surprised how much even a two-dimensional model, especially one that's well-defined, and this one is. I'm a mathematician by training. So I don't abide well by these labels, and then people don't define them or give precise definitions. So what we mean by left, right is what's your position on wealth inequality? You think there's too much or not? And what's your position on size of government? You think it's too big or not? And these are very simple, straightforward definitions that will put you in one of our 4 quadrants. So that's the short answer, if that's short.
Okay. I'm kind of curious, like the political compass that I'm familiar with, it's got way more questions than just 2. Did you originally ever think about including more than just 2 questions?
Of course I did, And if it weren't totally wrong, I'd have done it. Let me explain. If you got a 2-dimensional map, you don't get 60 questions. The political compass, to me, is just infuriating because it's so stupid. You're going to answer 60 questions. You think that's really accurate, right? That's accurate. 60 questions. They got to get me right. Do you realize on their map, you can answer 60 questions exactly opposite someone else? Exactly opposite. And they will put you both together on their map. Because they average them. It's like saying, we took a true-false test and you got 50%, somebody else got 50%. Well, you guys must agree completely on all those answers. No, you don't. Your answers could be exactly opposite. My other problem with the political compass is that it has a progressive bias towards big government. Please notice that on their map, freedom is down. It's not up. And I realize that's arbitrary. You can put freedom up or down, it's arbitrary. You could put the poor on the right and the rich on the left, and everyone would be confused because they've never used those terms that way in human history. But go ahead, you could do whatever you want with it. And that's what they did. They put freedom down. And I'm sitting here thinking, nobody says, Booker T. Washington wrote Up From Slavery. Can you imagine how disgusting it would be to say down from slavery? Down from slavery makes slavery even worse. So just the way we use the English language, there's a bias in up and down. Heaven's up, hell's down. That's how we grow up. It's what we think. Up is when you fly. Down is being pulled down from gravity, etc. And there's that map putting freedom. Now that's a small thing. It's a pet peeve of mine. The graph is fundamentally wrong by asking 60 questions. You have no clue how they define left, right. You have no clue how they define up, down. They put labels on it and let you read into it your own. So yeah, end of rant, but I do not, that's why I don't like political compass. And it is rampant. It is rampant out there.
Yeah, it is. I never really thought of, I mean, I didn't have the background you do in making political maps and different things, but I always thought it seemed kind of useless.
It is useless because there's no insight that comes from it. Granted, versus patricians in the Roman Empire, democracy versus aristocrats. That goes back to Aristotle. Machiavelli doesn't care about it. He only cares about that too. He talks about different types of governments, and they deal with, are the aristocrats running it or is the king running it, stuff like that. It's not until you get, in my opinion, it's not until you get into like Magna Carta, maybe as early, where they start talking about, well, there's some things not even the king should be able to do. So they're thinking of this concept of limiting governments, which is not common in the ancient world. It's more common in the modern world, and whatever. Anyway, those are the two most important questions. So to me, that's the basics for it. There are certainly other questions. Where does war fit on that? It depends on the war. Where does abortion fit? It's not, is that a left-right issue? Is it an up-down issue? Not obvious to me at all. No, it's not. So I know there are other issues, but these are, do not, under any circumstance, try and form a political party with any hope of success if you got people all over our map. You ain't even moving in the same direction. Half of you want to make the wealth more equal, half of them don't. Half of them want to shrink government, half of them don't. That's not a political party. You're aligning with people that don't even share your basic direction where you want to go. So,
I was wanting to get your take a little bit on culture war issues. Mm-hmm. That's not captured in the two questions, and I was just wondering, do you think that's largely a distraction that doesn't matter when it comes to determining how you kind of vote, or you just didn't want to include it in the first place because that's such a big topic right now?
I hear you, and I don't want to tell people that an issue they think is important to them. Abortion would be probably the most common. Is that the one you're thinking of? I'm
thinking more of like the pronoun issue, trans rights, yeah. And how people get all upset over that stuff, who's using what bathroom. That seems to be so determinate at like an everyday level of how I know someone's voting. And I was just wondering how you took that into consideration with making this model. Because all we hear about is bathrooms and pronouns these days.
Yeah, well, you're talking to an old man here, and to me, those issues are the silliest issues you ever had on this planet. I'm like, you're going to tell me a man can become a woman? That's a political issue? That's really important? Are you kidding me? I mean, that's more important than wealth and equality and size of government. But to me, what's going on with the wokeism, and we could get into this in much more detail, you are correct that it doesn't fit on our map. So to the extent that people really think that's the most important issue, one, I think they're lying. I think that they actually are a front for fascists. All right, I don't know how to us, the fascists are in the lower right. So I'll be very specific. Most of America has been drifting lower right my entire lifetime. We've been increasing government and we've been making wealth inequality worse. I want to go the exact opposite direction. I want this government smaller and I want the wealth inequality less, not more. And when you start arguing these other issues, you're getting played. You're getting played by a lot of big government people, progressives, but also fascists. Bill Gates, major corporate interests that would love for the peasants to argue about transgender rights and whether or not Leah Thomas gets to swim against Riley Gaines, this kind of stuff. It's just a pure distraction to me, and it will go away. It will go away as soon as we start focusing, in my opinion, on upper left policies. So if you wanted to get into the policies that we advocate, then how about if I advocate abolishing the income tax below $100,000? You think that's really more important than Riley swimming against Leah Thomas? No, I don't. I think most people are going to go, I care more about about subtracting $100,000 off my income so I don't got to pay income tax anymore. That is far more important. And I don't want to trivialize it for the people who, if they say truly that's their most important issue, you know what I'd tell them? Just to shut them up or make them or call their bluff. Fine. You can have all the transgenders you want in women's sports. I don't care. You give me what I want. You shrink that government in half. You cut that income tax in half. Now we're talking. Now we're making a deal. I'll give them their their stupidity, which to me is utter stupidity. People lecturing me on science who can't solve a quadratic equation, and yet and don't know that a man can't. That an XY chromosome is there for life. It ain't going away. It's not going to turn into an XX. I don't care how many. Is this a children's show? Because I don't care how many males.
No, it's not.
Okay, I was going to say, I don't care how many male sexual organs you mutilate, how much estrogen you pump in the guy. He's still an XY. He still has the bone structure. He's got most of the muscle structure. It's already developed. Whatever, Sorry, end of rant.
Sounds fair to me. No, go for it. Andrew, did you want to jump in on anything? You've been kind of quiet. Did you have anything to add about what he said? Or
So yes, we've done polling on this, and so what we found through a tip poll that Lloyd commissioned back it was the end of February, beginning of March. We asked the two questions, and we found that 61% of respondents said that they identified as upper left. They agreed that government is too big and that the wealth is too unequal. And amongst that 61%, of course, we found that 56% of Democrats were upper left, 60% of Republicans were upper left, and 66% of independents were upper left. And so, as Lloyd mentioned earlier, Gallup just released the poll about 51% of Americans identifying as being independent. And last year, that number was 43%. So there's been an 8% increase. And I'm just curious how many of those people now would be considered upper left. Of course, out of the different quadrants, we've also got the lower right, which is the direction Lloyd mentioned we've been drifting towards for quite a long time, my entire lifetime. And of course, the lower right quadrant, the lower right quadrant is where, everybody talks about the duopoly, the uniparty, and that's exactly where they come together. The uniparty exists in the lower right, and that's where they make compromise because they benefit greatly from increasing size of government, and they benefit greatly from wealth being more unequal because they're lining their pockets all the way to the bank. So now the real, like we said, these culture war issues keep us divided. It keeps the lower left and the upper right quadrants divided. It keeps them fighting amongst each other while the lower right coalesces wealth and power amongst themselves. And so they keep us fighting each other on the left and right. And we believe that, healing the division in the country is through compromise between the lower left and the upper right towards an upper left direction. So the lower left, like Lloyd said, their most important issue is wealth inequality. So if you can give them a solution, hey, if this policy will reduce the wealth inequality, but also decrease government as a means to do so, will you be willing to make that compromise? Same for the upper right. their most important issue, shrinking government. So as long as, you come to them with a compromise of, well, if you really want to shrink government, how about we do it in a way that also reduces the wealth inequality? And so that way, the compromise is made on the lower left and the upper right. You move upper left, and people get, the best of both worlds, I guess. Lloyd and I have talked about essentially applying the Hegelian dialect to politics to get the solution, the upper left position. So that's how you heal the division in the country. And as our polling shows, most Americans are, both on the Democrat side and the Republican side, and especially the independents, most of them are upper left already, and their parties certainly don't reflect the values that they have, because neither party's upper left. And the key insight is, with our model, is that there is no party in the upper left. And so that's where the opportunity for the independent and third party movements at.
Yeah, I will say, when we did the TIP survey, when commissioned that particular survey, the TIPP it's called. I'm trying to remember what that stands for exactly, but he's pretty credible poll. He's a national pollster and gave us a really good price. I think he was somewhat interested in this himself. He was the only one to predict 2016 election correctly, so he had some reputation based on that. When I went in with a presumption that most of the upper left, and I didn't know how many there'd be. I thought it would be a majority, but I wasn't sure, would be independents. That is not true. The upper left is the majority of independents. It is the majority of Republicans. It is the majority of Democrats, which surprised me too, because I didn't expect that. It is true that if you look at that upper right quadrant, which is the small government, don't care about wealth inequality quadrant, that's dominated by Republicans. They are well over half of the upper right, so they dominate there. In the lower left, as you expect, Democrats dominate. They are well over half of the lower left. The lower right is actually very small. It's only 4% of the American people, but it is what we traditionally call the center and the moderates. So it's like, so every time we compromise in America, we need bipartisan consensus, we need moderation. Polls show that most Americans hate that now. They don't like it. And they like the idea. I won't say they hate it, because they still love, we need these parties to come together. They don't want them. And then when they do come together, they hate what they get. Because when these two parties compromise with each other, when Mitch McConnell sits down in a room with Biden and Schumer, you ain't getting smaller government, people. And you are not getting the wealth inequality fixed either. You are getting betrayed is what you're getting. And they come together and they get what they want. They want a bigger government. They want more wealth inequality. Don't kid yourself. Their donors want it, etc. And the American people get increasingly frustrated. What we see emerging, what we think might be emerging here, which is hence the name, is a new center in American politics. We are not opposed to compromise, not if it's in the right direction, which we think is upper left. But yeah, you give me a compromise in the upper left direction. Maybe have a little bit less war. That'd be nice, a little bit lower taxes. That'd be nice. Maybe Bill Gates doesn't run the show as much. These are good compromises. But this system's not going to go that way. Two-party system as currently, you can see in the map the map behind Andrew sort of visualizes this, I believe, somewhat incorrectly. Now, that was an earlier map, but it does show, the Venn diagram stuff, and the Republicans are they're on the right. Republicans are they're on the right. That's their reputation. And they divide up, down. And the Democrats, they're on the bottom. They're progressives. Almost all progressives are big government people. And they definitely divide left, right, because they have a Hillary-Bernie split constantly between themselves. And then when these parties come together, they go lower right, which is technically fascist. All right, that's I don't use that to call somebody a Nazi or this, but technically fascism is a big government system with a considerable amount of wealth inequality. Generally, the plutocrats run the show in a fascist system. It's somewhat medieval too, if you think about it. It's like a return to the Middle Ages, where the peasants don't have much. It's a big government system. There's plenty of absolute monarchs out there and kings with a lot of power, and it's medieval. It's a lower right medieval system to me, only with a lot of factories and lots of cell phones.
Okay. What likelihood do you think there would ever be a third party that's competitive in this country? I mean, you keep saying this is where it falls into creating a new one, but we know they fight that tooth and nail. I mean, Kennedy can't even get on a debate stage.
No, I agree. And our system is rigged to be a two-party system and has been from the beginning. Okay, it's because the founders created. Andrew's a political scientist by training, so I think he'll echo some of this. I'll let him speak more about it. But when you have a system of winner-take-all elections, you will naturally get a two-party system out of that. So what we have is a gerrymandered, and the president is the ultimate winner-take-all. The more power you keep putting in the president, you ain't going to get three parties come out. You would need something like ranked choice voting. You have to change the way in which you do it. That might give you an opening for more parties. I personally despise the two-party system as well. It doesn't necessarily fit on the map, but I would love to see election reforms, such as ranked choice voting, but even more radical ones. What's called cumulative voting, what I call direct proxy representation. The Greeks, this is a little history here. The Greeks thought it was essential to democracy that you select political leaders by a lottery system, which is something that is inconceivable. Oh yeah, isn't that fascinating though? Can you imagine picking a Congress at random, the way we do juries, and see what happens? But it is extremely democratic, put it that way. So Aristotle's not wrong about that. If you just the jury system is probably one of the most democratic things we still have left. It doesn't come from the Greeks and Romans. It comes from the Vikings and those guys. They had juries more in a different way than did the Greeks. Greeks had juries, but they're juries of 3,000 people. So Socrates is tried by about 3,000 Athenians. What a mess. But whatever, that's how. Anyway, I got a field. So yes, we will be a two-party system so long as we continue the current election methods, I think. Now, that doesn't mean that a new party can't form. Historically, America was much more dynamic in its first 80 years. People don't know. It's been so long ago. The two-party system is so fixed, so entrenched, that it is more sacred than the Constitution at this point. Don't kid yourself. People are just fixated on that two-party system, can't think outside it. They couldn't care less their Constitution is broken as can be. That means nothing to them. All right. But the two-party system, how dare Mr. Kennedy go outside that? He must be a commie or whatever. During the first 70 years of American history, from George Washington to Abraham Lincoln, so from 1789 Constitution to 1860, America elected presidents from 5 different political parties. We had parties die, we had parties form. It was far more dynamic. Since the Civil War, it's been 2 parties, and we cannot break out of it, and it is entrenched. In part, I believe, because the plutocrats win that way. Let me tell you something. Goldman Sachs got 2 parties. I don't have anything. I don't have a party out there. So I would love to have even 1 party that represented my views, and I don't have it. And they got 2, best I can tell. And they have learned how to game the system this way and play, and, much easier to control a 2-party system than a 5-party system, particularly one that's dynamic and new parties can form. Most of this stuff that we're talking about is over people's heads. It's too abstract. They're not going to see that. They're going to fight about abortion. They're going to fight about wokeism. They understand that. They don't even really understand deficits and debt and stuff like that. The Federal Reserve. Ever try to talk to somebody about the Federal Reserve System? I mean, you want to you're going to glaze over their eyes. Are you kidding me? You're telling me my paper isn't money? Of course it's money. I spend it every day at Walmart. You're not going to they don't. And so it's a hard nut to crack. And these guys have got one heck of a stranglehold on it. But I'm Jeffersonian enough to believe, yeah, we're going to get a new party some way, somehow. It's going to happen. It's either that or the country's lost. I mean, I truly believe without a new party, you're counting on these two to fix it. Good luck. It's not going to happen. I see no hopeful signs of it from my short life, from my extensive lifetime. Put it that way. What I would say is there is a possibility that you could reorient the parties, somehow change their orientation, so that the upper left does become a new center. Wow, that would require abortion. Even that's not a good example. I mean, you have to truly flip these parties so that instead of them being like this, I don't think you can see this, but they're kind of like this. You got to make them like this. So when they compromise and come together, they come together as an upper left thing. Now, if you can get them to do that, what the heck, I guess I can live with a two-party system. I do believe that a two-party system is far less democratic. It wastes too many votes. I was very happy to see Kennedy buck the system. I really was. I think that maybe he could punch another hole in it like Perot did. Perot is the last third party. I mean, he got 19% of the vote and not one elector. Not one elector. The last third party candidate to win an elector, do you know who it is? You got any guess? Yeah, it's George Wallace in 1968. He got a lot of electors. 68 was quite a year in American politics. Country was, well, yeah, you had Kennedy shot, you had King shot, you had Democratic convention that this one may be more eventful. We'll see. I hope it is. But yeah, they killed each other at the Democrat. They just beat each other up. They didn't technically kill each other. They tried. But you have the 1912 election is the last time that a third party beat one of the two parties. Teddy Roosevelt ran as a third party. It managed to elect Wilson, and Roosevelt beat Taft in that election. And then World War I comes, and that becomes the premier issue. So once wars come, they do tend to dominate politics. Especially Vietnam War, very divisive. We fight over Gaza versus Israel now. Not that much, but we do, there's a lot of unrest over it. You can imagine how you get an unpopular war like Vietnam, it will dominate again, because, if they start drafting people and sending them over to fight, oh yeah, that gets your attention. No, I doubt that. I'm above draft age, and I'm the only one here that could have been drafted. Okay, so, and no, I was not. So, I had friends who were, and I know people who lost their fathers. My dad was in the Air Force, so yeah, it's a sobering thing. I can make jokes about it, but it's not funny. It's not funny when you lose your father in Vietnam, and I knew kids who did. Had friends who lost friends and stuff. Anyway, go ahead, Andrew.
It's scary to think the politicians just go up there and willy-nilly start wars and draft other people's sons, and they never do anything. But yeah, Andrew, I want to get your opinion. You've been quiet. You got to jump in.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. So one thing we have to keep in mind, of course, is that we do have third parties in America. We also have minor parties that pop up in a couple states. Like you mentioned, Perot started the Reform Party, which still exists today down in Florida. And then you've got the Constitution Party and the American Independent Party still out in California, reminiscent of, George Wallace, as we mentioned, that was his party. But we do have two third parties. We've got the Green Party and we've got the Libertarian Party, which is why Lloyd and I went to DC and attended the LP convention so that we could take a survey of party members, candidates, leadership, just everyone. So we set up a booth and we were there for about 4 days, and we pulled about 100 people or so. So I guess I don't know the full attendance of the convention. I'd say, would you say about 1,000 people or so, maybe over the course of 4 days?
Yeah, it was about 1,000. Yeah.
Outside
Based
of
on
the
their
people
vote totals on the convention floor, about 1,000. A little bit less.
Yeah, outside of the people that came to see Trump. But so of course we wanted to, our national poll results, of course, showed up for Democrats, Republicans, and independents. But national pollsters typically don't ask for third parties because they're so small in the population that they aren't statistically significant. So the only way we knew how to poll libertarians was to show up to the convention, which is why we did that, because we wanted to place the Libertarian Party on the EF model. So we showed up, we polled for about 4 days, like I said, 100 people. And the results we found were pretty interesting. Of course, on the size of government question, it was unanimous. Not a single person said that government wasn't too big, which was to be expected, of course, but it still makes it unique, the LP unique from the other parties we've already studied. So it still makes them unique, even though it was expected. But we found that 29% were upper right, and we expected the LP to lean upper right. And the LP was also, we found that they were 45% were upper left, which is astonishing. That surprised us. But what's fascinating is that we also found that 26% are in what we call the upper middle. So just split down the middle, because we provide, of course, do you agree with the question? Do you disagree? And then also leave a not sure option as well. That's how pollsters do it. And what was fascinating is the LP, members would come up and they'd stop on that first question, the wealth inequality question. Of course, as we said, they were unanimous. They could answer the size of government question like that, but they really struggled with the wealth inequality question, and it took them some time. And so a lot of them were unsure on that, which was interesting. And over the next couple of weeks, I've actually found a way to contact the Green Party, because we wanted to study them as well. And we're actually going to be circulating our poll at their online convention. I just got confirmation for that the other day. And hopefully they don't see this beforehand, because I don't want to bias the results. But
whatever.
But we're expecting, yeah. But we're expecting that, of course, they're going to be on the left. We think we might find the opposite, where they will be unanimous on the wealth inequality question, but will struggle with the size of government question. And in that case, we'll see that how much there is, I guess the middle left is what we'd call it on their side. So I'm curious to see how they poll. But the real questions we need to ask ourselves is, we've got these two parties. They've been around, these two third parties that have been around for so long, and why haven't they been successful so far? They've ran presidential candidates, they've ran local candidates. Why have they not been successful nationally? And we have reason to believe that it's because they're not taking an upper left direction. Because before we did the poll at the LP convention, we would say that the libertarians poll conservatives in the Republican Party towards smaller government. Meanwhile, the Greens poll the Democrats and progressives more towards the left, towards the equality. So essentially, they're almost the extremes of both sides. The more what was the term you used, Lloyd? I can't remember what you said when we were talking about this a while back.
Republicans on steroids? I don't know. It's kind of, we do believe that they are the wings for the most part, neither one of them has found the upper left policies that might give them success. Okay, they run on celebrities occasionally. Clearly, their votes go up the more dissatisfied people are with the two-party choices they get. So you see a spike, libertarian vote total, actually very high in 1980. That was the previous high watermark. That was Ed Clark. I do have a background in the Libertarian Party. I can probably out myself. I know a lot more about why libertarians fail than just our simple quiz can tell you. And there are numerous reasons why they have yet to, despite the dissatisfaction in government, despite huge opportunities. I agree. Perhaps I'm reading too much into your question before, Courtney, but this is my question too. Why hasn't this taken off? People are this dissatisfied. What the heck is going on? Some of that is explained by the two-party system just being a rigged game in winner-take-all elections, how we do things. That does hurt third parties. It's hurting Kennedy now. In fact, I'll say if we had ranked choice voting and using certain methods of ranked choice voting, Kennedy would win this election. Kennedy would win. He would overwhelmingly win because he is the second choice of just about everybody. If he's not their first choice, he's their second. So he could easily win a ranked choice voting. But that's not the only reason libertarians fail. And Andrew and I attended the Missouri Libertarian Party State Convention because we were experimenting with this stuff back then too, trying to get answers, get some insight. Two of the LP presidential candidates were there. Hornberger, who I go way back with. I've known him for years. I like the man a lot, but he is what's called a purist in the Libertarian Party. That's because they don't like to call themselves anarchists, they thought. But, it's close enough, okay? They don't have any big government people, as you say, in the Libertarian Party. It's a question of how pure are you. And he was there. And then Termott was there, who I had never heard of before. He's now the vice presidential nominee. I asked them the question, I can almost quote it. Libertarian Party has been failing now for 50 years. And that's a long time to be in the desert, even for Moses. What is wrong with this party? What are you going to do to fix it? They were clueless. Well, I won't say clueless. They weren't both. Termott was clueless. He said, that's a good question. And then went on to realize it was over his pay grade to answer that question. Hornberger told me, well, the party's not pure enough. Believe me, that's what a purist libertarian will always answer. I've been around a party enough that I know we just need to run more pure campaigns, and for sure, everybody's going to vote for us in droves. No, they're not, okay? Your party is failing for two reasons. It is too purist. It does go off on the deep end. It's running a candidate this time who is way too far out. He opposes purity blockers. I don't know if you knew that. That's something that should have come up at their convention, frankly. That's why over a third of the LP convention would rather have run no one at all. They voted for what libertarians call NOTA. So I don't know if, and on the last ballot, it came down to good old Chad versus NOTA. And NOTA got over a third of that convention. You got a dysfunctional party at that point. You got a serious problem, and they'll gloss over it. And why? And we never really learned why do they so object to Oliver? What's the big deal? Well, that's the big deal. He opposes laws so much. He opposes laws against child abuse, as far as I'm concerned. Libertarian, you can be a pure anarchist, but I would not lead with the abolition of murder laws. That's probably a mistake. Those are fairly popular laws. They've been around. Don't lead with that. And this guy's leading to oppose child abuse laws. That's fatal to a party. If that gets out, and I will do my part to get it out there, frankly, I'm done. You don't get to, so they have a purity problem that resurfaces again and again. Gary Johnson is no purist. We know that. He's no purist. And certainly Harry Brown was no purist either. So those are their high vote totals before now. And then they go back and they run another purist once in a while, and Oliver clearly represents that faction. But that's just a part of it. That kind of utopianism, what Andrew correctly labels utopianism, has been in the party a long time. And, you're not likely to ever get rid of it. You just don't want to let it control you. The real problem is they haven't found the upper left. And the poll of libertarians shows this too. Libertarians, are you familiar with their Nolan chart quiz? Okay, they have another quiz which actually predates the compass and was the first quiz I ever saw, really, and it's a 10-question quiz, and it's two-dimensional, and I think they were, you can see people struggling to get to these concepts, but the libertarian quiz strictly measures just how libertarian are you, so it's a pure, that's the thing called the personal freedoms and the social freedoms and stuff. And libertarians like to argue about this, and it's absolutely, really, they're not even a two-dimensional party. They're a one-dimensional party. It really is about size of government. They actually divide over left-right, same as donkeys do, same as the Democrats do. But they suppress that. They suppress that left-right divide. And in fact, they even think left means wokeism, which is not according to Karl Marx, it's not. Karl Marx would be way on the right if that's how you're going to define it. So, I don't know if I can conclude a thought with that other than libertarians fail again, two reasons, too pure, too utopian, and haven't found the upper left quadrant yet. I suspect the Greens may beat them there now. I think it might be easier to turn Jill Stein into a small government person, or at least turn that party in the upper direction, than it will be to get libertarians to embrace bottom-up tax cuts. I know I had spoken once before at a libertarian convention on sales taxes and saying to them, if you really want to get somewhere, come out abolishing sales taxes. These are regressive taxes. They hit the poor the worst. They clearly shrink government, and they clearly help the poor more. And in theory, both Democrats and Republicans should support that. They won't. They will oppose you tooth and nail when you go out there trying to abolish sales taxes. You got a winning issue, as popular as can be. Okay? And it just goes, I will tell you now, if you've dealt with libertarians enough, you say to them, we should abolish sales taxes. Do you know what the knee-jerk answer is? Can you guess it? We should abolish all taxes. That's really helpful, guys, because you just dodge. I'm trying to get you to think politically. I'm trying to get you to think in terms of what's the next step. How can your party win? How can you run candidates that beat theirs? And instead, back to utopia we go. We should abolish all taxes. Whatever.
It's one big echo chamber, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it doesn't, it's not political. And so it's not, anyway, it's in a sermon. There are reasons. Go ahead.
I was just curious your take on the Mises Caucus. I know it has nothing to do with your quiz, but you were talking about kind of what's wrong with the Libertarian Party. Do you think that was just a failed mission, the wrong way to go, just kind of a waste of time? Because it peaked, and then it kind of seems like it fizzled.
I was
at the convention. For
many years, I have advocated a hostile takeover of the LP. I thought it was what was needed. And so I was very, again, I had a libertarian background, so I was exceptionally interested in the Mises Caucus takeover. And the more I tried to dive into it, so what is this about? How does Mises differ from the other guys? All you got was basically, you might as well be asking, what are the Hatfields and the McCoys fighting about? Because I don't know. They're fighting because they've been fighting forever. It's possible maybe that the Mises people represented more of the moderate faction, and that was probably, I heard from many libertarians, and rightly so, that the party was weak in its criticisms of the COVID lockdowns. I mean, COVID was a big issue for America. I mean, it is the last really big issue. It's not the wars. It's not even the I would say the TARP bailouts were big, the 2008 meltdown under Bush. But this COVID lockdown was unprecedented and it was serious. And the Libertarian Party should have been front and center saying, no friggin' way. We are not going to allow this country to be locked down. We don't care about Fauci. We don't care about your experts. These are fundamental principles. And I thought the Mises Caucus might be a reaction to that. But they didn't fix a platform. They didn't fix much of anything. I think it was just infighting, a family squabble. Now, when I look at it, there probably are some wokeism issues. The LP used to be known, as I was growing up, as the party of drug legalization, right? This was the most controversial. I mean, believe me, it's way back when. But in the 1980s, 90s, and even before then, LP had been advocating drug legalization since the 1970s and shocking conservatives every time they did. Except William F. Buckley also advocated drug legalization, so go figure, as did Milton Friedman. So it was a little bit more complicated, but whatever. They were known for it, and it was a principled stand, and they were admired for it. Drug legalization has happened. It happened, no thanks to libertarians, who probably even discredited the issue because they would, they'd go so extreme that it would be legalized heroin for 5-year-olds. And the country's still not ready for that one, okay? So, I know you laugh, but I'm not making that up, okay? I really am not. There were libertarian candidates advocating this stuff, and that's why they lose the credibility. It's very difficult to be a third party in America. You're constantly asked, why don't you want to work within the two parties, et cetera? And it's a reasonable question. And the libertarian solution, like the Greens and the commies somewhat, is, well, we're more pure than they are. They're so impure, they're not worthy to walk the earth with us. And that keeps the party going. Something has to keep a party going that has failed for 50 years. Most people, that's a religious thing almost. That's a kind of religious commitment to an idea. You can't tell, Christianity has always had these small sects, right, of Protestantism or whatever, Seventh-day Adventists, I don't know. Apologies to you if you're a Seventh-day Adventist. But, it's just a niche, right? And you can't change their minds because they're going to heaven and you ain't. And so they are convinced that the correct solution is, if we just live pure enough, we will be a shining city on a hill. That's straight out of the Bible, right? That's, we will be the example for the world, and they'll all follow our pure pilgrim example. And they too will see the light, etc. That's how they think. And that's how you sustain 50 years of losses in a political party. So it's very dangerous to advocate what I'm advocating, which is, no, don't work it from that utopian outside in. Work it from the margins out. Don't look at where you want to go someday in some pure utopia. Yeah, it's fine if you want to, but that's not politics. Politics is, what's the next step? What is the next thing you need to do for the American people? And that's what I'm a fan of Lincoln, which is unlike most people on the upper right, especially. They hate Lincoln, man. Lincoln is, oh my God, he's Satan. No, he's not, people. He's actually the greatest president the country ever had. But how did he win an election? He didn't win an election by saying, I'm going to go out there and abolish slavery. He'd have lost big time. He won an election because he said there will be no slavery expansion, period. We're not sending it into Kansas. This is it. We're drawing a line in the sand. There will be no more new slave states, period. And that was enough to cause a civil war in this country. That moderate position, it's very moderate from our perspective. It's like, well, how much more milquetoast? All the abolitionists thought Lincoln was a wimp. He's just leaving slavery alone in South Carolina. He doesn't care about it. He just cares about it in Kansas. Well, that's all you needed to care about it. Believe me, if libertarians could understand this and really run hard on it, they'd win. They'd win. But they're not going to figure it out, so don't worry about it. Go ahead.
Yeah, they get a little culty. It's funny. They think that Trump is basically a cult, but it's a little culty origin inside the libertarians there for sure. Do you want to jump in, Andrew? Add anything?
Um, well, one thing that we got to keep in mind for, like we said earlier, our two questions is it's just it's surface level, and when you start asking more questions, specifically policy oriented questions, that's where you really will be able to determine how upper left somebody is, or whether or not they actually are upper left. So that's where that's where the steps come into play, because as Lloyd said earlier, with the Libertarian Party, they're, abolish all taxes, and so our idea is, well, start which tax? Start with one tax. Tell me one tax you want to start with, and then we'll move it along. That's pragmatic. That's very, straightforward. If you can do one, just keep moving along, keep moving the goalpost, which is, our way of thinking, at least. Because, for example, like we had mentioned, raising the standard deduction to Lloyd, what number did you say? Did you say 75,000?
Somewhere between 75 and 100,000. And we need to study it more, but I would not be satisfied with anything less than 75. That's about the median income in America nationwide. So you got to do it at least that high. And then, what the heck, 100,000, nice round number. Mm-hmm. That'll get Bill Gates' attention.
Yeah, so it really boils down to the policy and how we decide to move forward. And of course, there's great opportunity here for the Libertarian Party, for the Green Party, and for independents moving forward. If they come across the upper left and want to run policies or run campaigns on that, of course, we're advocating for a new party, a new upper left party, whether it means starting a new one or even, finding that compromise between the Greens and the Libertarians and somehow doing a merger of the two, and also draw people from the Democratic Party, from the Republican Party, and of course you've got that massive block of independents to build off of. And so, like you said, we've got two choices. Either realign the system and finding the new center in the upper left, realigning the two parties, which is a major task within itself. I think starting a new party would be easier, especially doing the coalition building amongst the current third parties and other minor parties, like I mentioned earlier. Just building a broader movement beyond just what we're currently doing. The Greens haven't succeeded, and the Libertarians haven't succeeded, and independents haven't succeeded yet. And so rather than trying to do this all on our own, whether it be through separate parties or independents running essentially one person shows, whether it be on a local or national level, the greater vision and greater picture is bringing this coalition of disenfranchised Americans that are tired of the system and giving them something that is doable. And it'll most importantly affect them on an economic level, and increase freedom and increase the equality in the nation. And one of the issues that I've seen with people, especially with the wealth inequality question, and we saw this at the LP convention, is people look at that and say, well, wealth's not supposed to be equal. And that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that, equalized wealth and wealth distribution is a lower left policy. It's not an upper left policy. Ours, bottom up tax cuts, as Lloyd mentioned, that's one thing that we strongly advocate for. Republicans and conservatives typically advocate for top down tax cuts, the trickle down economics of the Reagan era, and just that in itself is utopian, thinking that cutting the taxes on the top is going to find its way back down to the bottom, especially nowadays with how, greed and corruption have infected the free market and the government. You've got this corrupt merger of corporate and state power that work together, of course, to increase government and increase wealth inequality to the benefit of the wealthy and the elites and the government class. And so it's just, they want, doing top down is not the way to go. When you do it bottom up, Lloyd and I always talk about this because some people are worried about, are you going to raise taxes on the rich? And it's like, no, we're not going to raise taxes for anybody. We're just going to cut them bottom up. Because when you take the tax burden off of the poor, the working and middle class, you'll see economic growth in several ways, because you'll increase their purchasing power, which gives them more freedom. And also it makes people less reliant on social safety nets and welfare programs, because our goal ought to be to make the poor, the working and middle class more self-sufficient and self-reliant. And one of the silliest ideas is that is taxing poor people and taxing the poor, the working and middle class, because you tax $1 from them just to hand it to a bureaucrat, paying that bureaucrat to hand some loose change right back to them. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And so what I say for upper left policies, you can hit the Democrats and Republicans hard with this argument is, well, you look to the Democrats and you say, well, this policy helps the poor, and you care about helping the poor. You claim that, that's what your party stands for, helping the poor and the working class. And that's what they claim. And so this policy helps the poor, so you ought to support it. Then you turn to the Republicans and you say, hey, this policy shrinks government and or cuts taxes, which is what you guys believe in. You want limited government and you want to cut taxes. So that satisfies your end, your party's beliefs. So you ought to support this bill as well, or, this policy. And so that's where you can really hit both sides from an upper left perspective. So that's where the potential is on a policy and on a candidate level, campaigns running on upper left policies. And the Greens and the Libertarians could adopt that strategy as well if they see the opportunity and take it. And same with independents. I think striking while the iron's hot, when people are desperate for change and in the country. And so this is the direction I think we need to take the country in.
I would put it on a bumper sticker, and I use this argument: when the rich pay all the taxes, the government will be small. Period. There is no example in human history where the rich paid all the taxes and the government was big. There are numerous examples in history of the opposite, of big governments taxing mostly poor and middle income people and the aristocrats. Frankly, I don't know if you remember this, Warren Buffett actually wrote an editorial for the New York Times several years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago now, in which he pointed out that his average rate of taxation as one of the richest people in the country was lower than his secretaries. His average, let that sink in, okay? You will get the attention of even Oprah Winfrey when she realizes, you want socialism, Oprah? That's fine. You're paying for it. Poor, middle class ain't paying for it anymore. You pay for it. Go ahead. That's fine. I personally think that we shouldn't have socialism. I think the taxes should be lower for everybody. But if you really want the high taxes, Oprah, here's your chance, because we're going to push that exemption so high. I push it to 200,000, 250,000 eventually, where the vast majority of Americans are paying no income tax at all. They never heard of it. They don't file. The only people who file are the rich. That's it. Let them fight over it then. Let them get on the side of people who actually want to shrink government for a change and seriously so, because they're getting the bill. And then that's hardcore. I call that class warfare Jefferson style. That's not Marxist style. That's not what Marx was advocating. That's what Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson did advocate. In fact, did advocate. We got quotes from Jefferson in tons of speeches where he's saying the rich should pay all the taxes. So that shocks most people, and it shocked me for a long time too. But if you want the quotes, I can send them. I probably could find them right now, actually. But if it's no, it does. I mean, all kidding aside, it makes no sense to tax people just to give them their own money back. It only makes sense if you're a progressive. If you truly believe that it's one giant collective glob and the role of government is to take everything in and then give back what's fair. And that's how people view this. Lots of progressives see the world that way.
I'd like to kind of get into what the upper left policies are for people that are listening, so they kind of know what that means. If they think they're upper left, what are they subscribing to? And particularly kind of expand a little bit more on the negative income tax. Got your list in one of your articles of the upper left. So just kind of go into that, specifically negative income tax. I've not heard of that one before.
You can. So the negative income tax. So before we get into that, as I said earlier, the first step is taking the tax burden off the poor, working, and middle class. And we believe that can be done through, of course, raising the standard deduction to, before we said 50 to 75 to 100,000 or more, just keep pushing the goalpost. So that's the first step, because like I said, once you stop taxing them, they get to keep more of the money that they earn, which means less reliance on the government to make up for the loss of, they pay into the government, they get back, change. As I mentioned, the bureaucrats hand them back some change to work with. And so you let them keep more of their money, which means less reliance on the government. And so where the negative income tax comes into play, a lot of people right now are talking about because of automation and technological advances, AI, with automation and loss of jobs. So people have been talking about UBI being the solution. Now, UBI is interesting because does that mean that, as Lloyd said, does Oprah get a check? Does Bill Gates get a check? How do we measure what amount of money people get? And it's just throwing money at the problem. We saw what the stimulus checks did. It helped some people, but also caused inflation to a degree. We also have the outrageous spending that's causing the spending and printing that's causing the inflation more than anything. But which comes down to the welfare state. And so we spend about, I believe, well over $1 trillion a year on the welfare programs in the United States. And so you've got talk about UBI and whether or not you leave the welfare state intact in addition to UBI. And our idea is that you can actually, with a negative income tax, you can provide greater benefits than what UBI could bring, because you just get a check every month from the government. Here's a certain amount that you need or whatnot. Our idea is that you take it and you combine it with to consolidate the welfare state essentially, and that's through you give people more options. Number one, you can give them the a lump sum, just a direct payout, or you give them the option to accept vouchers for basic needs and necessities, such as, for food, healthcare, medicine, childcare. I mean, you could expand it. Essentially taking all these welfare programs and all the institutions that operate them and consolidating them into a single program where you give this person an amount and they have the option to either accept the payout in US dollars or whatever, or you could select the vouchers and receive them and exchange them at I believe we started off with a 2-to-1 ratio. So you actually get more you get more benefit out of choosing the voucher option. And so it gives people, when you give people more options, you give them more freedom rather than, and of course the welfare states, it's a mess of, bureaucrats, and people go into the system, and it takes time, and it costs a lot of, it costs our government, like I said, over $1 trillion a year to maintain. And one thing I'd like to note is that when you cut the taxes for the poor, working, and middle class, you will no longer need 90,000 agents working for the IRS. And so that's where savings are there. You implement a negative income tax and consolidate the welfare state by doing this voucher program. And you'll no longer need these massive institutions that cost billions of dollars to run because you're bringing it under one roof. And so, Lloyd, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm not, I don't view I think the current welfare state, if I summarized it, would be current welfare state's a mess. It has created a mess. We don't generally acknowledge it, and we're trapped in it. So we're trying to figure out how to get off this, but it has destroyed the families of the poor in America. They're fatherless now. The black family is absolutely destroyed. We act like it's been all positive. A lot of people are trapped on it. So you don't just pull the rug out from under them completely, which unfortunately I see a lot of conservative solutions. The solution to Social Security even is, well, just quit taking the checks. Yeah, okay, that's not going to work. So, they have no real solutions to this. So the negative income tax, like the universal basic income, or what we used to call, this stuff's old ideas. It's not that new. And they called it guaranteed annual income back in the 1970s. And it was being talked about then. Milton Friedman proposed an alternative to the guaranteed annual income, which was the negative income tax, which is a better way. And the way that works is, I'll give you an example. Suppose you started taxing people negative in this sense. Turn in your income and take the difference between your income and say $20,000. Pretty low amount. Make it $30,000 if you prefer. And tax that at a negative 50%. So in other words, if you made nothing, if you made absolutely nothing at all, then the difference between $30,000 and your income be $30,000. You would receive money from the government, a check, $15,000 a year. That's yours. Suppose you made instead $20,000. So you made $20,000 income. Take the difference between your 20 and 30. You get taxed as a negative 50% on $10,000. So they're going to give you $5,000. This avoids what is one of the great problems with the guaranteed income. There's absolutely no incentive on some of these programs to make even $1 more. In fact, in our current welfare state, taxes the poor effectively at over 100%, depending on where they are at the margins. So a lot of welfare programs in the federal government, that you get the entire benefit package, the whole thing, as long as you stay under this amount. You go over that amount by $1, you lose all the benefits. That poor person is being taxed at close to 100% on that $1 they went over, and they will never make more than that amount. I've had a friend who worked at a Walmart. He's a supervisor there. He had one woman who was working great. She was an awesome employee. He wanted to promote her. There's tears in her eyes as she says, I can't take it. If I do, I lose all these benefits. They're trapping that person. Your heart ought to go out, especially to the working poor who's trying to make honest, great worker. And here you are cutting the rug out from under her because she can't move up. She can't. She's trapped. Cannot move. She has to give away. The point being made, okay? The negative income tax avoids that. So we consider the negative income tax approach better than the universal basic income. I would consider the universal basic income, as absurd as it is to give Oprah that check. That's really stupid. But it's better than the current welfare state. So if we could abolish all the current welfare programs, replace it with just cash, going out to the poor, we'd all be better off. I don't doubt that for a second. Then they make the decisions. We added wrinkles like vouchers and things like this to try and help the poor even a little bit more. But we needed more control as well, we think. You don't want to be in a situation where you're handing people money and enabling drug habits, alcoholism, things like this that do happen more at that. So if you give them a voucher, you're actually helping them more, but you're saying you got to spend it on food. You got to spend it on rent. You got to spend it on healthcare, whatever it might be. And this kind of directs it, and it gives a little bit more. We don't have these details all worked out yet. This takes more explanation. I think it is a good idea, but obvious, and the welfare state is a major problem. It absolutely is, so I'm not disputing that either. But if you look at the upper left policies that are most popular, and I'll run, one is the bottom-up tax cuts, so increase the standard exemption. Another one is freeze the spending. So freeze the spending currently in the federal government. And that, it's clearly an upper policy because that's going to fix the size of government. So you're clearly moving up. As to whether or not you're moving up or left, you could dispute that, I suppose. We would obviously advocate end all the corporate welfare. All that stuff's got to go. And so freeze the spending, pull out of NATO, leave NATO. We consider that an upper left policy. Again, it clearly shrinks government. Okay, you're actually cutting back on government. Whether or not it's left or right, perhaps open to dispute, but it definitely an upper policy. I do think that the military industrial complex, to use Eisenhower's phrase, is tilted towards the right. Boeing gets most of the money. Boeing stockholders get the money. The generals make a good living. I think the poor are not as helped by it personally as would be the rich, but I guess others could dispute that. There are other policies. That's the short list. The negative income tax and the end of the welfare state is definitely there. The hardest thing to do is to make a case for the welfare state that still limits government and is within what I would call Whig principles. I use upper left and Whig interchangeably. So I'm saying, how can you justify this policy of just giving money to people for doing nothing? It's not generally a good policy to do that, and it's definitely a bad policy if they're rich. Okay, so I don't want to do that anymore. But how do you justify that welfare state? And I will introduce a new concept that, as far as I know, no one else has come up with, called socially inherited wealth. And I do believe that that's a valid concept. This has always been disputed in regards to land ownership. Land ownership is one of the toughest ownerships of property to justify, because most property ownership is justified based on lock and based on the fruits of labor. So it's the little red hen, and if you make something, you own it. Now that's and that's why slavery is wrong. You're robbing the person of the fruits of their labor. It's a fundamental violation of principle. So you don't ever do that. And that's, if you bake the bread is yours. You did the work. That's pretty common. But land doesn't fit that model. None of us made the land. It was here before I was born. It'll be here after I'm gone, and all of us here. So where do you get this concept of land ownership? I'm not saying it's wrong. It doesn't make the land ownership wrong. It does make it different than the fruits of labor. And it is subject to a more social constraint. And it is on that basis that you have this, in a sense, we all own the land collectively. And we are all due a rent on that basis for whoever owns the most land has to pay the rest of us some rent. This will sound socialist, and maybe it is, I don't know. It depends on how you it's a reasonable question. It would, it always echoes that way to me too, but it's not, depends on how you do it. I don't know if you know Marx's definition of communism straight out of and incidentally, Marx uses communism and socialism interchangeably. I mean, these are sloppy terms and we argue about them, but to Marx, they're basically the same thing. I used to always say, a commie is a socialist who's in a hurry. That's a little rough. Anyway, Marx defines communism as abolition of private property. That's straight out of the Communist Manifesto. It is one of the more insane notions ever. You don't abolish private property completely. One, because of the fruits of labor. I mean, you're absolutely denying someone the fruits of labor. It's a clear violation of justice. Private property is an important institution, but not all property can be justified. This gets into a philosophical discussion, but I use Jefferson as an example. He clearly knew that property could not always be justified. In the Declaration of Independence, what does he write? Unalienable truths, that among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. He deliberately left out property. The absolute common phrase in English law is life, liberty, property. That phrase occurs in the Constitution of the United States. It occurs in John Locke. It occurs, I guess, even in Magna Carta. I think that's the phrase. I'm trying to think now, but I think that phrase is even in Magna Carta. Jefferson deliberately changed that phrase to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Why? He's not a stupid man. He's got a reason. It's because he didn't want to include slavery. He knew that slaves are being treated as property. He knew, as we all do, that sometimes property exceeds, just because you call it property, sometimes that's just an arbitrary title in law. And Jefferson is trying to say, these are not natural rights. Jefferson is not an anarchist. He is not a socialist. He's not a Marxist, but he does know property rights are limited. It is very typical of libertarians in particular, but also in the upper right, to view property rights as sacred. You don't ever touch them. You don't touch property rights. Well, depends on the property right. Okay. And that's why they're constantly beat up by people like Bill Gates and corporations, because corporate laws especially are arbitrary rights of property. They are established by the society itself. There is no corporation in nature. It doesn't exist. There is free speech in nature. There is freedom of religion. Things like this exist even without any laws at all. But you can't have a corporation with a hell of a lot of laws. And I think you want to know the difference between upper left and upper right. Now you're starting to see it. There is definitely a difference between an upper left approach that we're advocating versus the traditional upper right approach of large numbers of small government people, particularly in the Republican Party, but also in the Libertarian. I don't know. I hope that helps. I don't know.
Okay. I was curious how y'all would place Andrew Yang's Forward Party that he launched a few years ago. Like, where would he fit into your political map, and does that party have a chance? It looks like it doesn't. Obviously, I don't think most people even know it exists.
I guess, yeah, I investigated the Forward Party too, because like you, I'm a junkie for politics. So I'm exceptionally curious. What's this guy doing? He's known mostly for the UBI, right? That's what he's known mostly for. But even that was I don't recall that was even a policy they were advocating in the Forward Party. They mostly were about election reforms, which I support as well, but it's not enough to build a new party on. So it doesn't surprise me that it failed. My short-term answer on the Forward Party, he called it Forward Party because he didn't want people to notice he was a progressive, which is what he is. So you didn't want to call it Progressive Party. I mean, like there's a backward party. Give me a break, okay? It's typical. So give him some credit. I thought he was one of the better candidates in the Democratic primary. He's clearly a policy geek, a wonk. Those kind of people appeal to me personally. He was straight answers, things like this. I think he recognized that donkey party is a disaster. It's a disaster, people, and he needed to get off it. And I will apply. And Kennedy recognized the same thing. He's a lifelong Democrat. His name is synonymous almost with the Democratic Party, and he realizes it's toxic now. It's toxic. We saw what happened with Biden. Not to get into it, Biden is clearly not in full command of his faculties. And yes, that he probably has some kind of advanced or early stages of Alzheimer, if not middle stages. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I do know when you conclude a sentence, my favorite Biden quote, we finally beat Medicare. And that's your final sentence, and that's conclusive. This man doesn't, and the donkeys are just scrambling. And you know what the real message is? The real message? They knew this all along. Don't kid yourself. The American people finally saw it, but it's what are they all in shock? Hillary Clinton's in shock. Oh my goodness. Joe Biden doesn't, he's kind of feeble-minded. They've known this forever. They've known this for at least 4 years. And they don't care because he's not calling the shots anyway. What they're trying to do is reassure their fellow donkey fascists, whatever, that, hey, don't worry about it. He's not the captain of the ship. Yeah, we give him a steering wheel. We let him, he's like a little kid in a car. You let him pretend that they're driving, okay? But they're not. Don't worry about it. And we will never, Goldman Sachs knows who's at the wheel. It's not a problem. That's my take on the forward party. Go ahead, Andrew.
I don't know a lot about the forward party myself. I watched the 2020 Democratic primary pretty close. I watched a lot of the debates and thought he brought some interesting ideas to the table. And of course, starting a new party, like we said, is necessary for combating and breaking this two-party system. I'd like to see them take an upper left direction. The only way to really know is to ask them the two questions and see where they fall, and also look at their policies to really see if they align with that to begin with. But I'd be open to ask them and poll them. I don't know how many people are a part of their party, but it'd be interesting. I'd like to ask all sorts of different minor and upcoming parties the same question to see if this really is a realignment or a new center, as we're calling it. But yeah, I'd be interested in contacting the Forward Party and asking some of their leadership and members. I just don't know how to go about doing so quite yet. Probably we'll look into that after we do the Green Party, but we'll just see.
Excellent. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I appreciate y'all coming on. I just did have one more question if you got a few more minutes. If you could maybe give the audience an idea of a person that represents each quadrant. So like who best represents upper left policies, upper right, so they kind of get a feel for maybe what it means in real life.
So in the lower right quadrant, in the lower right quadrant, I would say, and Lloyd, I'm sure we will agree on this. People think that Joe Biden's in the lower left and that Donald Trump's in the upper right. And that couldn't be further from the truth. They're actually both in the lower right quadrant because during Trump's administration, you saw, of course, like I said, the first 2 years you get the top-down tax cuts, definitely affects the wealth inequality, and then just let the state and the bureaucrats run rampant during COVID. I mean, you see during the COVID pandemic, you see at both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, both of them, you see an excessive transfer of wealth upwards while also seeing an explosion in the size and control of the federal and even state governments during the lockdowns. I mean, you saw businesses close, people lost everything. And meanwhile, we made billionaires every other day during the pandemic. And so Trump and Biden are both of the lower right quadrant. They're just Biden's closer to the left and Trump's close, towards, up and on the right. So they're in the same quadrant, in my opinion. Now in the lower left quadrant, you see that's where Bernie Sanders is. That's where Cornel West is. We'll see if Jill Stein fits in that quadrant. We have reason to think that she is, but we'll see how they poll. Now in the upper right quadrants, more of Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Gary Johnson up in there, and then I don't have anyone for the upper left at the moment.
Yeah. Not in modern politicians. You know, I
Nope.
mean, believe it or not, our founders were upper left. Jefferson and Paine are both definitely upper left. Yeah.
Who's the closest to embodying upper left?
Today,
Even if
it's either. It's a good question too. And Ron Paul the more Ron Paul emphasizes, you know, the foreign policy issues and the Federal Reserve, those are technically upper left policies. So, you know, and he did emphasize those a lot. The Federal Reserve especially, I should have mentioned that sooner, but when you have this central bank that's printing money without limit, truly without limit, you know, unaccountably, there's an upper right aspect in that because that's how they inflate it. But and that's why there's a lower right aspect. What am I talking about? Abolishing the Federal Reserve is clearly an upper left policy. It is a definite shrinking of government power, and it is definitely cutting the legs out of one of the driving forces of plutocracy in America. That's this special privileged banking class that gets it to the money first. So yeah, when you start questioning the Federal Reserve, abolish is a strong term, I realize that, but you know, you start limiting the power of the Fed, let's say, you're definitely moving upper left. There's no doubt. And Ron Paul is close on that too. So I don't see that as much in Rand. Definitely not in Ted Cruz's wife for Ted Goldman. So yeah, he's not likely to be that. Most of your Mike Lee's, Massey, they're upper right. They would freak out at some of the policies we're advocating, I think. And unfortunately, most American politicians are lower right. That's, you know, Trump is definitely outside the box. They don't trust him. He's definitely an outsider. He has no political experience. He ran for president and that was it. But did he question the Federal Reserve? No. He has questioned some of the empire policies. He's mostly an immigration guy. Immigration right now shows up as number one issue for most Americans. Is that an upper left issue, a lower right issue? That's not so easy to determine. I would point out that immigration typically is not popular with the poor in America, blacks in particular. But you know, if you're talking that you're working class, you know, below average, you're not making your money off stock dividends, then those immigrants are going to lower your wages. And so, yeah, it's a major issue for more the working poor than it is and then of course the crime and things like this, that's different. That doesn't necessarily fit left, right, or up, down. Nobody's, I don't know if that helps you or not, but I do think Trump is hard to classify. But he is mostly lower right, in my opinion. He's not that big a threat to the status quo, other than there's a reason why they had the War of the Roses. The peasants didn't care about it. They don't care whether it's the House of Lancaster or the House of York. But if you're in one of those two houses, it means the War of the Roses is very important to you. And that's the way I view Trump. You know, if you're used to having political power, Trump's a threat to it. So you're going to, in both parties, now he runs the Republicans. And Trump sucks the oxygen out of a room too. He just really does. You can't talk about issues with Trump because Trump is always the issue. So it's his clownishness, his buffoonery, his lies. He does lie, people. I mean, he doesn't lie the same. It's not a big lie necessarily, but he sits there and says, you know, I took the cognitive test and I was the highest score they ever had. My golf score is the greatest of all time. You know, all the experts on COVID were amazed at how much I knew about COVID. You know, this kind of stuff. Constantly bragging is not whatever. You know, Trump is just a clown to me. He ain't Adolf Hitler. No, not real. You know, we could get into a lot of political stuff that doesn't necessarily fit the EF model. Right? I mean, and what our message is, I guess, if you're trying to, don't be distracted by that stuff, people. Be careful about being distracted and sucked back into this tribal politics, this donkey elephant incessant warfare that they will have you playing that game forever. Focus on, in our judgment, upper left policies. Move this country deliberately in an upper left direction, shrink that government, lower that wealth inequality, do both at the same time, you'll get there. You'll save the nation. And I assure you, Jefferson will applaud, as will Paine, as will John Adams. All of our founders, almost all of them, are upper left.
Where would you say Kennedy would be on there?
Lower left.
You didn't mention him. I'm curious.
I would put him lower.
Left,
yeah, Andrew
okay.
may disagree, but he came out of that background. He's still, I'm more critical of Kennedy than Andrew is, and there are reasons for that. But so I probably better do most, but I would probably put him in the lower left. I think there's a chance he could still move upper left. I do. But he's not getting it yet. And he's very weak on policy, period. So if you go out to his website and you look for Kennedy policies, have fun. You're going to get slogans and plenty of them. In fact, if you look at his website, he actually says we need to raise the standard exemption. So he says that on his website. I would love for you to interview somebody in the Kennedy campaign and ask them how high. Just give me a number. Please. Because if it's $75,000, I'm with him 100%, and that's an upper left policy. They no doubt about it. It's clearly upper left. But there's no amount given. It's just kind of, just out there. He does say he can't bring himself to say leave NATO. He does say cut military spending. By 50%, incidentally, which is a pretty high number. It gets my attention, and I'm sure it got the Pentagon's attention too. But how? What are you going to do? And then he says, no, we got to keep our commitment to NATO. Well, then you ain't going to cut anything by 50%, buddy. That's not going to happen. Anyway, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I would say, especially with his criticisms of the lockdowns, like I mentioned earlier, he's the only candidate that's come out to notice that, like I mentioned, that during the lockdowns, we saw a tremendous exchange of wealth upwards from the bottom to the top. And you also saw a tyrannical government emerge, telling us, giving us mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and, holding the economy hostage, holding businesses, big and small hostage during the lockdowns. And it's, of course, we're now past the days of COVID, but some of the policies are still there. And the damage has already been done. So, like you said, Lloyd, I think the potential for him to move upper left is greater than any of the other candidates currently in the race, because at least when you recognize that the wealth has been transferred up and that the government has expanded, during COVID and is still doing so, I mean, that's essentially saying that government's too big and that wealth's too unequal. It's so close, so close.
That's what drew me to Kennedy initially. No, I'm glad you mentioned it because, he was one of the best critics of the COVID lockdowns and the whole insanity of the approach that we took on this. He's highly skeptical of Big Pharma and of Fauci, et cetera, and of all the CDC experts. He also, he opposed mandatory vaccines on principle. So, there was a lot of good stuff there, and that's and he was smart enough to leave the Democratic Party. That's also a big plus. So Kennedy's probably my fallback vote, basically. I'm not going to vote for Biden. I'd vote for Hitler before I'd vote for Biden. Hitler's more honest. That's how it is. Biden to me is just absolute evidence of corruption and just absolutely broken system. Trump, nah. Yeah, you're probably going to get more of the same under Trump. You're not going to solve anything, and it probably could get worse. I mean, a lot of the inflation that we got, whatever, I don't get into it. I'm not voting for Biden or Trump. The libertarians were my usual fallback. Sorry, guys. You blew it this time. You're running a guy who opposes child abuse laws. Wow. I'm not going to sit for that. So that leaves me with Stein or Kennedy. I may flip a coin when I get in the voting booth, and I'll definitely take a shower afterwards. Okay, guys. But what I will say, Andrew and I met, allowed us, because we met during the Kennedy, when I was really interested in Kennedy, and he was too. Okay, so we were doing stuff way back in July of 2023. Before Kennedy was still a Democrat. He hadn't even left yet. So we go pretty far back on that and saw the promise. And absolutely. And the Kennedy people that I have met have been more open to an upper left message than even Ron Paulers, than libertarians. So do not discount these Kennedy voters. These are pretty decent people in my view all along. And come December of this year, they're going to be wondering what's next, because Kennedy's not going to win this election. It's such a long shot, we all know. But Kennedy, just because you don't win an election doesn't mean you don't move the ball down the field. You don't have to score a touchdown every time. That doesn't happen. If he can get us closer to the goal, he's a good thing. And I'm not such a strong critic. His vice president is certainly lower left, and Kennedy is kind of like an old-fashioned 60s Democrat, like his father, like his uncle. They're still very naive about the welfare state. He is way too naive, doesn't understand the damage it's caused, and he still thinks more of it's going to work. But other than that, he believes in free speech. He absolutely does. He doesn't want the government to control everything. The 1960s Democrats arguably better than the 1960s Republicans. Okay, so it's not, Kennedy doesn't make you upper left yet, but, we'll see. And a lot of his people, yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying the potential's there. The potential is there.
There's a quote that Ron Paul, and I came through a Ron Paul background too, because I was very active in that campaign, and I still like Ron Paul a lot. I still admire him and what he did. Reminds me sometimes of Kennedy reminds me of that at times, because it's kind of this new movement. It's kind of cool. But Ron Paul likes to give a quote: "There's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come." I don't know if you've ever heard that from him. It's not his quote. He thinks he's quoting Victor Hugo, and it's actually not Victor Hugo either. Somebody else, some other Frenchman. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is it's true. There really is nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. Paine used to say, ideas penetrate where armies can't. So if you had the American people actually rise up and realize, I know you're pissed at these parties, but you have got a political map in your brain. No wonder you can't figure this stuff out. No wonder CNN and Fox manipulate you constantly. If you will focus on what we believe to be the right political map, understand that you are actually upper left. You are a small government liberal. That's what you are. In the traditional sense of these terms. That's what a classical liberal is. They're small government liberal. And we have killed those. You can't name a single American politician that is saying any of this stuff. And that's sad. That's where the country came from. Anyway, so that's our message. We think that's a powerful idea. We think its time has come. We just got to get it out there. We thank you for helping.
Yeah, I would say the time has come too. Would you like to tell the audience where they can maybe catch you online, read more of your work, or maybe another event you'll be at doing a poll?
I'd love to. We are in progress of building a website now. There is no podcast as of yet. I used to, our time frame is not to really start in earnest till after this campaign. That's my opinion. And I'm not saying I wouldn't talk about it to anybody, but I do think when you're talking, July of a presidential election cycle, that's all anybody wants to talk about. They want to talk about, you for Biden or you for Trump? What? You don't like either one? What? You don't even matter. Why waste your vote? You know the drill. And we are going to wait until the day, we need to be ready to truly launch, I believe, yes, at the end of this year, when I can promise you, this is a guarantee, half the American people are going to be as mad as they've ever been because they think Adolf Hitler just got elected president. No matter who it is, who wins. Doesn't really matter who wins. You're going to have a divided nation that is coming close to being ungovernable. It's a very dangerous situation. Do not assume that ends in freedom and liberty and all sorts of great stuff. it very often, I won't say this is how Hitler rose to power, but even in the French Revolution, which Jefferson and Paine both supported, and it's a great revolution, it doesn't end happily. And no, when Germany was in a mess by 1930s, it's a disaster. It's gone through a hyperinflation. People wanted law and order and all this stuff, and and there are sinister forces in America that aren't going to want to let go of this power. So it's no guarantee that you're going to get a soft landing out of any of this. We need to be ready, and go to the upperleftcenter.org. That is the website, the domain name that has been registered, and you can get everything there. You can go to LloydSloan.com. Andrew's out there as well. Let him promote his stuff, but that's all out there.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter under Cottingham for Independence. That's what my tag is on Twitter, or X. X, formerly known as Twitter. I still call it Twitter, but so yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay, sounds great.
Did you take?
When I go ahead,
did you take the quiz? I am curious now. Did you take this quiz? Too quick.
I mean, when I was reading about it, I would say I'm upper left. I want to shrink government, and I do believe there's wealth inequality. The wealth inequality question kind of, when I hear that, it makes me think of socialist policies.
Yep.
I believe there's wealth inequality, but I don't think I'm going to agree with a lot of the solutions for them, if that makes sense. But if we can shrink the welfare state, it's all going towards the same goal, which is what
I wasn't trying to convince you. I would have guessed you were upper right. Okay. I not to, you just kind of get a feel for this. And I figured, okay, she's a small government gal, that's for sure, because I saw the other interviews, and probably leans upper right. That is exactly where I came from. So it takes time. You ain't never going to be able to call yourself a leftist. It's going to take you 10 years to get comfortable with that. Everything you ever heard. Where are you from? The accent. I'm curious about that too.
So I was raised in Ohio, went here to college, grad school, everything, but my mom is from all over the South, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas. So I just got this like Southern cocktail accent from her.
Boy, her training really stuck better than Ohio. That's for you guys.
It did.
I was also raised Southern. My mom very Southern, so I don't know if I can do the accent proud enough to really try it. But there's nothing as impressive as a refined Southern accent. Not the.
Well, I hope I sound refined.
You do. It comes across. It's very. All my instincts are anti-aristocrat, but that's the one part of aristocracy. Just that really refined, high. Drinking mint juleps and sitting there watching the river go by. Yeah, that ain't bad life at all. So, anyway. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to degrade us at the end, but
no, that's fine. No.
I was quite curious, and definitely, see, Andrew was I shouldn't out him either, but might help people. He comes from a Bernie Sanders background. He knows where he's come from a different, exactly.
Yep.
And you could he told his whole story, and he's told it to me. I should let him tell it, but he was a political science major. He knew it was confusing. Truly, I've never seen anybody take to this as quickly as he took to it, because it was like the scales dropping. He's told me this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but it's like the scale dropped from his eyes. Said, "Wow, a lot really makes sense now that didn't make sense before."
Yeah, because a little bit about my story. So I grew up with friends and family that were predominantly Republican, and so I identified as a Republican up until I was about, I'd say about 18 years old. Of course, before I, really studied the history and the political science aspect of it when I went to college, that's just what I identified with, because I had been, political socialization as a child, growing up in a Republican background. That's just what I attached to. Now, when I went to college, I started, I went to the University of Evansville in southern Indiana. It's kind of a purplish area. You've got universities down there, so you've got the more liberal aspect of it, and then it's also southern Indiana, so it's also quite red as well. And so that just really, I started realizing that, that while the Republicans, they're right on the small government, but I didn't see any solutions for the wealth inequality or helping the poor, working and middle class. So then I hopped over, I crossed the aisle and became a Democrat throughout college. And of course, like Lloyd said, I supported Bernie Sanders in 2020. Now I supported Donald Trump in 2016 and then went to Bernie Sanders. That's such a large, leap. And of course, this cycle I'm supporting Kennedy. And I've always found myself to support the outsider candidate, the non-establishment type candidate. So, and then I saw the lockdowns, and I saw what the Democrats were willing to bypass and overlook and turn a blind eye to. And then seeing what they did to Kennedy in the primary, rigging the primary against him, and Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips, just to throw the weight behind Biden. And of course, I saw in 2020 how they had taken, everything they could to push Biden across the finish line to kneecap Bernie Sanders. And then, of course, I saw Bernie, endorse Joe and still supports him to this day. And so I left the Democratic Party, even though I wasn't even in it for very long, and became an independent. And then, because while I was in the lower left, of course, I saw, well, they care about the wealth inequality. And so I guess at that point I turned a blind eye to the small government in me, portion in me, but then opened my eyes to, I guess I've been an upper leftist this whole time. I was just confused and didn't know what it meant, and I didn't know what it was. But my senior thesis, like I said, I'd mentioned this to you earlier, Courtney, that my senior thesis in college focused on how Americans view the role of government, specifically in economic and social policy. So I was on the track to finding it. I just didn't know what to look for and where to find it, because throughout school they always tell us that the political spectrum's linear. You got the Democrats on the left, Republicans on the right, and independents in the middle. And it's like, why are the independents in the middle? What does it mean to be in the middle? What does it mean to be on the left and on the right? They just say that's just how it is. And so when Lloyd introduced me to this idea, it just clicked. And made sense to me, and I finally can confidently describe myself as an upper left independent.
And define it.
And be able to define it. Yes.
Correct. Yeah, we're not sitting here throwing out the terms left, right, or up, down without clear, precise definitions for what those mean. Yeah, do not trust anybody who's throwing out these labels, and then you ask them, well, what do you mean by liberal? What do you mean by conservative? And they can't answer that question. Then you are being suckered. You are being conned. That's the message. Make sure they at least define the political labels they use. If they're willing to do that, they'll make me happy. I'm not going to get bogging down in, do they have to call themselves upper left? No. They know what I mean when I call myself that. That's sufficient. If they don't want to call themselves that, they could get another term, but better define it so we can figure out, okay, how does that fit on our map? How does that fit from where we're defining things?
Yeah, Americans are so uneducated when it comes to just civics in general, and then they don't have any concept for politics. We can thank the American education system for that.
Yes, we can, can't we? That's another pet peeve, but that's another rant that must wait for another day, because don't get me started. I mean, they had 12 years in that schooling system to teach the Constitution of the United States. They failed completely. 12 years to teach a 12-page document. And most Americans can't tell you what the heck is in there. They can't. So where do you find Social Security in the Constitution? Where's the authorization? Where's abortion in the Constitution of the United States? Where's the right of a president to bomb any country he wants, without a declaration of war? Where do you find that in the Constitution? Anyway, like I said, don't get me started, because, and we ain't going to fix any of that. We're not going to fix any of it till we fix the politics. But it really is true.
That's true.
No, it's not. Trust me, from somebody who has tried. I didn't come up. I found the upper left model about 10 years ago. But, I've been fighting this fight, trying to restore this Constitution in the broader sense all my life. Going back to, I voted for Ronald Reagan way back when. So this is a long time, a long struggle. And, they're not going to solve this year. Hopefully we are not at the point where it's so unsustainable in the debt that it collapses, and I'll be dead, but you guys will still be around. And it won't.
I have a feeling it's going to get a lot worse before
it could get a lot worse. Yes, yeah. I'm not going to argue with that either. It's a very depressing. However, there's just something inside me that says I never give up on America. I just don't do it. It's like, I'm not a Cubs fan, but I do understand Cubs fans. And you don't ever give up. You don't. You keep fighting. You keep going up there and swinging at every pitch, etc. I'm a Cardinals fan. We're used to winning. I don't like this so much. And when I hear people say, "Oh, this is the worst America's ever been," I'm thinking like, well, there was that Civil War thing. Obviously you're not from the South at all, because if my Kentucky grandmother would have heard you say that, yeah, she'd have known better. America has faced some even the political divide was arguably worse in the 60s. It's pretty bad now, yes. The tribal warfare, this is really bad for the tribalism. And the way the donkeys and elephants go at each other, just it's driving everybody nuts. But the country has faced worse problems, and it should be able to get out of this. There are no more soft landings. That is my estimation too. Do not expect a soft landing. It's going to be, and it's children and women first. Okay, no more TARP bailouts. No more money that goes to the rich fat cats who made the problem. No, they get bupkis. That's my attitude. Anyway, never mind.
I agree with everything.
Yeah, I figured most people do. Okay, I don't get arguments over stuff like that. What you get is, how do you fix it? How do you fix it? They're dying for solutions. We both, Andrew and I we obviously talk a lot. We're partners in crime. And we talk about Kennedy all the time, and oh my God, if only he would just embrace some of this, where he could launch. I wouldn't predict victory. I'm just not that naive. Andrew thinks he can win by just doing this alone. No, I don't think he can. I think there's major forces allied against him, but he would change the nation. He will build an army that eventually must succeed. These plutocrats and this big government forces have never been hit with ideas like this. Never. Think about that, because if we keep doing what we've been doing to go after him, and no, Trump is not going to fix him. Is he better than Biden? I already told you Adolf Hitler's better than Biden, so, sorry.
No, hey, I'm all for it.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I want to say this too. I just feel obligated. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I'm so glad you asked both of us to come on. I watched your interview with Jill Stein. I thought you asked her excellent questions. I thought she was too long-winded, and I did it myself, and I apologize. I'm sorry. I do think you asked.
But you had very interesting, unique things to say.
But
she repeated herself, but your stuff was very interesting.
I hope so, because I hope we didn't bore you at least, and I do think we would love to come back on when you've had more time to think about this, because I do think it is outside the box, and it takes a little. Do not underestimate the power, that's all I'll say, of this simple little model. I know it's weird, and there's not much to it, but it is much more powerful than you might think as you start to figure out well, why? That's my message in a sense. And, we're past that now. We need to get to other stuff and other things. But that simple model can change minds. It can change minds.
Yeah. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Yep.
Occam's razor.
Okay. This has been, yeah, true.
Yeah.
Now that you know where we've been, find out where we're going. Tune in to Ladies Love Politics, where you can stay informed without going insane.